Maybe it'll give me something. It won't, the man said quietly, his voice calm but certain. There are only a few small teddy bears in there. Nothing else. Annie didn't turn. Her small fingers stayed pressed against the clear plastic box, as if she could feel something beyond what her eyes could see. She gave it a gentle shake, careful, controlled just enough to make the toys inside shift with a soft rustling sound. Maybe, she whispered, her voice barely there. Maybe it'll give me something else. She leaned closer, her breath faint against the surface. Like a little truck, she added. A blue one. A voice came from behind them. She's been at it for a while. The security guard said, not unkindly, just observant. Keeps hoping something's gonna fall out. He stepped a little closer, hands resting on his belt, glancing between the girl and the man in the tailored coat. Good thing it's a charity toy box. He continued with a small shrug. Otherwise, that thing would have jammed already with all that shaking. Annie froze for a second when she heard him. Her hand slowly dropped from the box. I'm not trying to break it, she said softly, still not turning around. I'm being careful. The guard nodded once. I can see that, he said. Just don't expect it to work, all right? Annie didn't answer. She just looked at the toys again. The guard lingered a moment longer, then stepped back to his spot near the pillar, his attention already drifting elsewhere. Michael Carter watched everything without speaking. He slipped his phone into his coat pocket and lowered himself slightly. Not enough to intrude, just enough to meet her somewhere closer to eye level. Why do you keep shaking it? He asked gently. What are you hoping it'll do? Annie hesitated. Her fingers curled into the sleeves of her coat, disappearing into the worn fabric. She didn't look at him at first. Instead, she kept her eyes on the box, as if the answer might still be inside it. My brother's birthday is coming, she said after a moment. Michael waited. I wanted to get him something, she continued. He likes trucks. Her eyes flickered briefly to the blue one near the front of the pile. The kind with big wheels. Michael followed her gaze. Then why not buy one? He asked, his tone careful, not dismissive, just direct. Annie shook her head slightly. I don't have enough money. Again, no shame, just truth. Michael studied her. Where's your family? He asked. My mom's at home, Annie said. She gets sick sometimes. A pause. I was saving money, she added, her voice lowering just a little. But I used it. For what? Annie finally looked at him. For her medicine. The words settled between them, quiet and heavy. Michael exhaled slowly. Around them, the mall continued its rhythm holiday music. Footsteps. Distant laughter, but here, something had shifted. Something quieter. More real. I heard people talking, Annie said after a moment, her gaze returning to the box. They said there's a place here, where people leave toys. For kids who need them. Her hand lifted again, almost unconsciously, and rested lightly against the plastic. So I came. She gave it another gentle shake. Nothing. Maybe, she whispered. It just needs a little help. Michael watched her closely now. He glanced at the box again, then back at her. You didn't do anything wrong, he said quietly. Annie didn't respond right away. She turned her head slightly, her eyes searching his face not for kindness, but for truth. It's okay, she said, but it wasn't. He could hear it. Michael followed her gaze once more. Just a child, standing in front of a locked box, hoping the world might give her something she could give away. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't walk away. Michael stood there a moment longer. What's your brother's name? He asked. She blinked, as if surprised that he would ask something so ordinary. Marcus. How old is he going to be? 4. The answer came with the faintest lift in her voice. The first sign that joy still existed somewhere beneath the caution. Michael noticed it immediately. 4, he repeated. That's important. She nodded. He says 4 is a big boy age. The corner of Michael's mouth almost moved. Not quite a smile, but something near it. And you came here by yourself? This time Annie hesitated longer. Her eyes drifted toward the long corridor that led to the mall entrance, then to the polished floor beneath her shoes. My mom knows I came, she said at last. She's resting. Do you live nearby? She gave a small shrug. A few bus stops. He imagined her on a city bus alone, coat too thin, hands tucked into her sleeves, carrying a hope that looked like a toy truck. The image unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "What kind of medicine does your mother need?" Michael asked. Annie's shoulders stiffened. He heard it immediately. The question had gone too far, too fast. "You don't have to tell me," he said, easing his tone. "I'm just trying to understand." For a long second, she said nothing. Then she rubbed at a mark on her sleeve with one thumb. "She coughs a lot," she said. "And sometimes she gets dizzy when she stands up." Michael felt something old stir in him then, something he rarely let surface. A memory, unwelcome and clear. His father at a kitchen table, sleeves rolled up, sorting bills into neat little piles while his mother slept in the next room. After another round of tests she swore would be the last. Michael had been 10, old enough to hear the worry in the silence, young enough to believe adults could still fix everything if they wanted to badly enough. "My mother used to get sick too," he said before he could stop himself. Annie looked up. He almost regretted saying it. He was not a man who offered pieces of himself casually, certainly not to strangers. Yet the words remained there between them, simple and irreversible. "Did she get better?" Annie asked. Michael looked at the truck again rather than at her. "No," he said. The answer sat quietly in the space between them. Annie did not offer sympathy. She did not say she was sorry the way adults did when they wanted to move around pain quickly and politely. She only nodded once, as if she understood that some truths were too heavy for decoration. That small grace touched him more than any rehearsed kindness could have. He straightened and reached into the inside pocket of his coat for his wallet. Then he paused. The obvious thing would have been to hand her cash, a few bills, enough to buy the toy, maybe more. The problem could be solved in seconds. It was how his world worked. Identify need, apply resource, move on. But something in Annie's face told him that money by itself would land wrong. Not because she would refuse it, but because it would turn this moment into charity too quickly. And charity had a way of leaving a person smaller than it found them. Instead, he looked back at the box. "Who's in charge of these donations?" he asked, more to himself than to her. Annie gave a tiny shrug. "I don't know. The lady at the bus stop just said people leave toys here." "Wait here," he said. Annie's face changed immediately, not dramatically, just enough. The guarded look returned, the one that said she had heard those words before. Michael saw it and stopped. "I'm not leaving," he said. "I'm going to find out who has the key." She studied him with those steady, unreadable eyes. "I'll be right there," he added, nodding toward the customer service desk. "You'll still be able to see me." That seemed to matter. Annie glanced toward the desk, calculated the distance, and finally gave a small nod. Michael crossed the corridor. People stepped aside without thinking. A young employee at the customer service counter straightened the moment he approached, not because she recognized him personally, but because men who carried themselves like Michael were rarely kept waiting. "Good afternoon, sir," she said with professional brightness. "How can I help you?" He gestured toward the donation box. "Who manages the toy drive?" Her smile faltered for half a second as she followed his gaze. "Mall Outreach coordinates it with a local church. The boxes get opened every evening." "Who has the key now?" "I'm not sure, sir. Probably the event office." Michael glanced back over his shoulder. Annie was still there, standing exactly where he had left her, small and motionless beside the box. Her attention was fixed on him with a concentration that felt older than childhood. She was not watching because she was curious. She was watching because she needed to know whether this was the moment he disappeared. If this moment touched your heart, please like this video, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. Michael turned back to the employee. "Call them," he said, his tone still polite, but now carrying the effortless authority that had built his empire. "Please." The young woman picked up the phone at once. The employee covered the receiver. "They're sending someone down," she said. Michael nodded once. Then he walked back toward Annie, slower this time, not because he was uncertain, but because something inside him had already begun to change, and he knew enough about change to recognize it when it arrived quietly. When he reached her, she searched his face before she searched his hands. "They're bringing the key," he said. For a second, she didn't move. Then her eyes widened, not with excitement exactly, but with something gentler and rarer. And though the truck was still behind the acrylic wall, though the evening had not yet turned and nothing had actually been given, Michael understood that something had already shifted. He had not walked away. Now the world, for once, would have to decide whether it intended to keep pretending not to see her. The woman with the key arrived 5 minutes later, though to Annie it must have felt like much longer. She came down the corridor in sensible shoes and a red volunteer vest that read Holiday Outreach Partner across the front. A lanyard bounced lightly against her sweater as she walked, and in her hand was a ring crowded with keys of different shapes and sizes. She wore the expression of someone prepared to solve a small inconvenience quickly and move on. "Good afternoon," she said, a little breathless. "I'm told there's a question about the donation box." Michael stepped aside so she could approach it. Annie stood very still near the artificial Christmas tree, hands tucked into her sleeves, her eyes fixed on the clear acrylic box with a focus that made the rest of the mall seem far away. The overhead lights reflected faintly across the surface, blurring the toys inside. Still, the blue truck remained visible between a plush bear and a doll in a torn package. The volunteer followed Annie's gaze and smiled, though it was the kind of smile adults used when they already knew the answer would disappoint. "Oh, sweetheart," she said gently. "These toys are part of a collection program. They get sorted at the end of the week and delivered together." Annie's face didn't crumble. That was what struck Michael first. There was no dramatic fall, no child's open heartbreak, just a small stillness, as if she had heard words like that before and had already learned how to absorb them quietly. "I only wanted one," Annie said. "For my brother." The woman's smile dimmed but didn't disappear. "I understand. Really, I do. But we can't open the box and hand things out one by one. There are rules." Rules. Michael had spent his life writing them, enforcing them, profiting from them. He knew better than most that rules were often just order with good manners, useful, clean, efficient, and sometimes cruel in ways that allowed everyone involved to feel innocent. The volunteer inserted the key anyway, turning it partway as if to demonstrate that the lock worked. Then she let go. "If we open it now, other people might expect the same," she said, looking at Michael more than at Annie now. "It becomes complicated." Michael glanced at the box, then at the woman. "Complicated for whom?" She blinked. "For the program," she replied, her professional tone holding, though less comfortably now. "These drives are coordinated. Inventory gets logged. Distribution is scheduled. We have to be fair." Fair? The word stayed in the air a beat too long. Michael looked at Annie. Her eyes had returned to the blue truck, but something in them had changed. The hope was still there, just smaller now, tucked farther back, like a candle protected from wind. She nodded once, almost politely. "It's okay," she said. Michael had heard that phrase from her twice already, and both times it sounded like the opposite of truth. The volunteer seemed relieved. "Maybe there'll be a family event next Saturday," she offered. "Sometimes we hand out donated gifts then." "His birthday is tomorrow," Annie said. The woman's face softened for a brief second, but the softness did not change anything. That was the trouble with many people, Michael thought. They mistook sympathy for action, as if feeling bad were somehow a form of help. "I'm sorry, honey," the woman said. "I really am." Annie gave a small nod, the kind adults usually accepted because it made them feel the situation had been settled. Michael did not move. "Thank you for coming down," he said. The volunteer seemed uncertain whether she was being dismissed or corrected, but she settled on a quick professional smile, turned the key back, and stepped away. "Happy holidays," she said to no one in particular. Then she was gone, swallowed by the slow holiday traffic of the mall. Annie stared at the box another seconds before lowering her eyes. "I should go," she said. Michael frowned. "Already?" She shrugged. "It gets dark early." The sentence was simple, but it carried more than weather. Michael heard the bus ride in it, the walk from the stop, the apartment waiting at the other end, the mother with the cough, the little brother who still expected tomorrow to feel like a birthday. He looked down at Annie's coat again. The zipper had been repaired at some point with a mismatched metal pull. One of the pockets sagged at the seam. He thought of the world outside the mall, the wind off the avenue, the slush near the curb, the cold that worked its way into a person one careful layer at a time. "Have you eaten?" he asked. Annie hesitated, and that was answer enough. "A little," she said. Michael recognized the phrase instantly. People with plenty said they were starving when they were merely inconvenienced. People without enough said a little when they meant not really. Nearby, a mother laughed as her husband tried to balance too many shopping bags. A child in a knit cap ran past holding a paper cup full of cinnamon pretzel bites. The smell of butter and sugar reached them a second later. Annie did not look at the child. She looked at the floor. Michael's jaw tightened. "When did you last eat something warm?" he asked. She was silent long enough that he wished he hadn't asked. Then she said, "This morning. It was nearly evening." He thought of the untouched lunches thrown away every Friday in his corporate offices. Conference trays cleared while people were still talking. Expensive coffee poured out because it had gone lukewarm. Waste had always bothered him in principle. Today it bothered him in detail. Annie shifted from one foot to the other. "I can go," she said again. "Thank you for trying." He studied her face. She meant it. That was the extraordinary part. She was thanking him not because he had solved anything, but because he had stood still long enough to be disappointed on her behalf. "What bus do you take?" he asked. "The number 9, then the 22. He nodded, storing it away without meaning to. "And your mother is home with Marcus?" Another nod. "Does she know you might be late?" Annie pressed her lips together. "I told her I'd be quick." There it was again, that careful answer. True enough to stand, incomplete enough to protect someone. Michael felt an old, familiar instinct awaken, the one he used in negotiations when he sensed the real issue lay just below the surface. Only this was not business. There was no advantage to be gained here, no deal to close. Just a child trying to manage the dignity of her family with the tools she had. "My mother hated when I was late," he said quietly. Annie glanced up. "She used to wait by the window," he went on. "Even if I was only 10 minutes behind." "Did she worry a lot?" "Yes." Annie considered that. "My mama does too," she said, "even when she tries not to." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The mall noise seemed to soften at the edges, as if the evening itself had drawn a little closer. Michael found himself imagining Annie's mother in a dim apartment, checking a clock, listening for footsteps in the hallway while trying not to cough too hard. He imagined Marcus asking if his sister brought anything back. He imagined the answer if she walked in empty-handed. Something in him settled then. Not a question, a decision. He did not announce it grandly, not even to himself. It was simply there, final and clear. "What if the box doesn't matter?" he asked. Annie looked confused. "What?" "What if?" he said, lowering himself again so his voice would meet her at eye level. "You don't need that box to give your brother a birthday gift?" Her brows drew together slightly. "I don't understand." Michael held her gaze. "I'm saying there are other stores in this mall, stores that sell toy trucks." She looked toward the blue truck in the box, then back at him. "I know, but I told you, I don't have enough." "You don't," he said, "but I do." The words should have sounded simple. Instead, they seemed to startle them both. Annie's face changed not with excitement, but with caution. Hope, Michael realized, was never pure in a child who had been disappointed often enough. Hope arrived carrying suspicion. "Why?" she asked. There it was. The honest question. No performance. No strategy. Just why. Michael thought of boardrooms, shareholders, quarterly calls, and the polished emptiness of a life arranged around control. He thought of his mother at the window. He thought of a 6-year-old girl using her savings for medicine instead of toys and still coming all this way to find a gift for someone else. "Because your brother should have something to open tomorrow," he said. "And because you shouldn't have to shake a locked box and pray for mercy just to make that happen." Annie stared at him. The security guard by the pillar glanced over, then looked away again. Somewhere above them, lights twinkled across garlands hung from the upper railing. The season was full of songs about generosity, but Michael had never noticed until now how often people preferred the idea of giving to the inconvenience of actually doing it. Annie swallowed. "I can't pay you back. I didn't ask you to." Another silence, longer this time. Then, in a voice so soft he almost missed it, Annie said, "Marcus would really like a truck." Michael rose to his full height and offered her the smallest nod. Not too warm, not too forceful, just steady. "Then let's go find him one." And for the first time since he had seen her standing beside that locked box, Annie's expression shifted into something fragile and unfamiliar. Not happiness yet, but the beginning of belief. For a second, Annie did not move. The holiday lights above them glimmered against the polished floor, and the sound of the mall returned in waves, footsteps, laughter, the soft chime of a cash register somewhere beyond the corridor. But she remained where she was, her eyes fixed on Michael as if she were still deciding whether he was real, whether this moment might vanish the instant she reached for it. "You mean now?" she asked. Michael gave a small nod. "Yes, now." Annie looked toward the donation box one last time, toward the blue truck trapped behind the clear wall, then back at him. Something in her face shifted, not relief exactly, not trust either, but the quiet surrender of a child too tired to argue with hope when it finally knocked. She fell into step beside him. The toy store was on the second level, past a bookstore and across from a shop that sold expensive kitchenware no 6-year-old would ever notice. Michael led without hurrying, careful not to stride too far ahead. Annie kept close, but not too close, her thin coat brushing lightly against itself as she walked. She said nothing at first. Neither did he. On the escalator, she stood very still, her small hand resting on the black rubber rail, her eyes wide as the floor dropped away beneath them. Michael noticed the way she watched everything, not with the casual curiosity of a child on an outing, but with the alertness of someone entering territory that did not naturally belong to her. The toy store glowed with warm yellow light and the orderly chaos of abundance. Shelves rose in bright rows, stacked with dolls, puzzles, trucks, board games, science kits, trains, plush animals, and Christmas gift bundles wrapped in shiny red paper. A mechanical dinosaur near the front let out a cheerful electronic roar. A little boy in a green sweater laughed while his grandmother held up a box of wooden blocks for approval. Annie stopped just inside the entrance. Michael turned back. "You all right?" She nodded too quickly, but her eyes were moving everywhere at once. He understood then that this was not simple for her. People liked to imagine children were naturally delighted by plenty, but they forgot that abundance could be intimidating when you were used to counting every dollar before it was spent. Too many choices could feel less like freedom than danger. "Take your time," he said. Annie pressed her lips together and walked forward carefully, as though she were afraid of brushing against something she couldn't afford. Her gaze skimmed past shelves of dolls, plastic race cars, action figures, stuffed dogs, and bright boxes of building bricks. Then she found the aisle with toy vehicles. She stopped so abruptly Michael nearly missed it. There were trucks of every kind: fire trucks with telescoping ladders, monster trucks with giant tires, construction trucks painted in yellow and orange, pickup trucks, dump trucks, even a toy tow truck with a tiny plastic hook. Annie stood at the edge of the aisle as if looking into another world. "Marcus likes the big ones," she said softly. Michael glanced down at her. "Show me." She stepped closer to the shelves, slowly at first, then with a little more certainty. Her hand lifted toward a red fire engine, then drifted past it. A yellow dump truck, a blue pickup. Her fingers hovered near each one, never quite touching, as though touching might be a form of claiming. Finally, she pointed to a sturdy blue truck with silver wheels and a wide plastic bed in the back. "That one," she whispered. "He'd like that one." Michael took it from the shelf and handed it to her. Annie stared at the box in her hands. It was not a large toy, not especially expensive, but the way she held it made it seem heavier than it was, as though it carried far more than plastic and cardboard. "He likes blue," she said, "and he always says trucks should look strong." Michael found himself asking, "Does he say that often?" A small smile flickered over her mouth. "All the time." It was the first time he had seen a smile on her that wasn't guarded by apology. He looked around the aisle. "Is that all?" Annie's expression changed instantly. The smile disappeared. Her shoulders drew in a little. "That's enough," she said. Michael knew enough to hear what she meant. Enough meant more than sufficient. It meant acceptable, safe, small enough not to feel greedy. He nodded once, but his eyes moved to the shelf below, where a soft brown teddy bear sat propped against a stack of boxed puzzles. Its fur was a little darker around the ears, and a red ribbon was tied around its neck. "What about this?" he asked, reaching for it. Annie shook her head almost immediately. "No, sir. The truck is enough. Does Marcus have a bear?" Her hesitation answered before her words did. "He has one," she said, "but it's old." Michael held the teddy bear out to her anyway. "Then maybe this one can keep the old one company." For the first time, Annie looked genuinely uncertain, as if the world had shifted beneath her feet and she no longer trusted her balance. She stared at the bear, then at him. "That's too much." "No," Michael said quietly. "Too much is when a child has to choose between medicine and a birthday present. This is just a bear." She lowered her eyes. He regretted the sharpness in his own voice the moment it appeared. The anger was not meant for her. It was meant for a world that made children think kindness should be rationed. He softened his tone. "Take it." Annie accepted the teddy bear with both hands, carefully, like someone receiving something fragile. At the register, the cashier smiled at Michael first and Annie second, the way people often did. Michael noticed. Annie noticed too. He could tell by the way she shifted her weight and kept her gaze lowered while the items were scanned. The truck, the bear. Then, as the cashier reached for tissue paper, Michael looked toward the front of the store, where a display of children's winter hats stood near the entrance. He saw Annie's thin coat again in his mind. The loose seam, the worn zipper. No, he thought. One thing at a time. He paid, took the bag, and handed it directly to Annie. She did not open it. She held the handles tightly instead, pressing them against her coat as if she feared someone might take it away before she reached the door. When they stepped back into the mall corridor, the smell of food drifted over from the lower-level pretzels, coffee, roasted nuts, butter, sugar. Annie's grip tightened on the bag, but her eyes flickered toward the food court before she looked away. Michael noticed. "Come on," he said. Her head turned. "Where?" "To eat." The resistance was immediate. "I'm okay." "No," he said. "You're polite." "That's not the same thing." Annie looked down, and he could see the struggle cross her face. Wanting something, refusing to ask, refusing even to agree too quickly in case agreement itself cost too much. He led her to a small cafe tucked beside the bookstore. Quieter than the food court and warmer, too. They sat at a table by the window, where evening had begun to settle over the parking lot outside. Michael ordered tomato soup, a grilled cheese sandwich, and hot chocolate for Annie before she could protest. For himself, just black coffee. When the tray arrived, steam curled up from the soup in slow, fragrant ribbons. Annie stared at it, then at him, then back at the food. "You have to eat while it's hot," Michael said. She reached first for the hot chocolate, wrapping both hands around the cup as if she needed warmth before anything else. She took one cautious sip, and something in her shoulders loosened. Only a little, but enough for him to see it. Then she broke the sandwich in half, not to eat faster, to save part of it. Michael watched her fold one half carefully into a napkin and slip it into the pocket of her coat. "For later?" he asked. Annie nodded, eyes lowered. "For my mom." He said nothing for a moment. He only looked at the child across from him, the toy bag clutched against her chair, the soup cooling between them, the half sandwich hidden away as if love itself had to be stored before it disappeared. And in that moment, Michael understood something with a clarity that unsettled him. Annie had not come to the mall hoping to be rescued. She had come trying, with all the dignity a 6-year-old could carry, to take care of her family. That was what broke him open. Outside the window, Christmas lights blinked against the darkening sky. Inside, Annie finally lifted the spoon and tasted the soup. Slowly, carefully, as though even now she wasn't entirely sure she was allowed to have it. Michael leaned back in his chair, his coffee untouched, and watched the warmth return to her face one small sip at a time. Somewhere deep inside him, a line had already been crossed, and he knew, with the unsettling certainty of a man whose life had just begun to shift, that buying a truck was never going to be the end of this story. By the time Annie finished the last spoonful of soup, the sky outside had turned the deep blue of a Chicago winter evening, the kind that carried darkness early and cold with purpose. The cafe window reflected the soft amber lights inside, making the world beyond the glass seem farther away than it really was. Michael glanced at his watch, not because he had somewhere more important to be, but because time suddenly felt different when measured against a child's bus ride home in the cold. "You should get going soon," he said. Annie nodded, though the nod was reluctant. She wrapped both hands around the paper bag with the truck and the bear, keeping it close to her side. The napkin with half the sandwich sat hidden in her pocket, and Michael noticed the quiet precision with which she kept checking to make sure it was still there. Not possessive, protective. As they stood to leave, Annie looked at the bag again, then up at him. "I didn't say thank you, right?" she said. Michael paused. "You said it." "No." She shook her head once. "I mean, right." He saw then that gratitude, for her, was not a social reflex. It was a responsibility. Something she believed had to be done properly, carefully, so no one could accuse her of forgetting what was owed. "Then say it your way," he said. Annie held the bag tighter. "Thank you for the truck, and the bear, and the food. Marcus is gonna think." She stopped, as if even finishing the thought might make it feel too big to trust. "He's gonna be really happy." Michael gave a slight nod. "That's enough." But Annie stayed where she was. "And thank you," she added quietly, for not laughing. The words struck him harder than they should have. He had spent years in rooms full of polished people who laughed at the wrong things with perfect manners. Not openly, not cruelly, just enough to remind someone they had stepped outside the invisible rules of belonging. He had rarely thought about what it felt like on the receiving end. "I'm not sure there was anything to laugh at," he said. Annie looked at him for a moment, and this time something in her expression loosened. Not trust, not fully, but the first inch of it. When they stepped back into the corridor, the mall seemed louder than before. Holiday music drifted from ceiling speakers. Families moved in clusters. A silver-haired couple passed arm in arm, the woman carrying a bakery box tied with red string. A young mother buttoned a little girl's coat, while the child complained about the cold. It was an ordinary scene, almost painfully so. For Annie, Michael thought, ordinary was probably a luxury. At the escalator, she hesitated. "I can take the bus," she said. "It's okay." Michael looked down at her. "I'm sure you can." It was not the answer she expected. He could tell by the way she blinked. Then he added, "But it's dark, and it's cold, and you're carrying gifts and food. I'd rather make sure you get home." Her fingers tightened around the bag. "My mom says not to get in cars with strangers." Michael almost smiled. "Your mother's right." That seemed to settle her for a second, until confusion returned. Then we solve it another way," he said. "You don't get in my car unless you decide you feel safe. And your mother can decide too." Annie watched him carefully. He continued, keeping his tone matter-of-fact. "I can call a cab. I can walk you to the bus stop and wait until you get on. Or I can drive you and speak to your mother from the sidewalk before you decide anything. Your choice." The choice mattered. He saw that immediately. Children in trouble were usually told what would happen next. Adults called it help. More often, it was just control, with a softer name. Annie glanced toward the glass entrance doors where the evening beyond looked dark and wet and sharp. Then she looked back at the bag in her arms. "If you drove," she asked slowly, "would you stay outside first?" "Yes, and not just leave." "No." That answer seemed to land somewhere important. She gave a small nod. "Okay." Michael led her through the lower level and out toward the private parking entrance near the side of the mall. The blast of cold air hit them the moment the doors opened, and Annie visibly braced against it. Her coat was no match for the wind that cut through the concrete corridor leading to the garage. Without thinking, Michael removed his scarf. Annie looked up sharply when he held it out. "It's fine," he said. "Take it." She hesitated in the same way she had over the bear, as though every offered kindness needed to be measured against some invisible cost. "It's nice," she said at last, meaning too nice for someone like me. Michael ignored the implication. "It's warm." She let him drape it around her shoulders. The dark wool nearly swallowed her small frame, but the moment it settled, some of the tension left her face. The car waited under a row of dim overhead lights, black and polished and far too expensive for a child like Annie to approach without suspicion. She stopped several feet away. Michael did not reach for the door immediately. "This is the part where you decide again," he said. Annie looked at the car, then at him. "You really talk like that all the time?" He almost laughed. "Like what?" "Like there's steps." He let out the breath through his nose. "Usually." "Yes." A faint smile touched her mouth. "Marcus would say, 'You sound like school.' Then I hope he likes school." He likes lunch. That one drew the smallest real smile from Michael. He opened the rear door and stepped back. Annie climbed in carefully, setting the toy bag in her lap before touching anything else. Once seated, she ran her fingers lightly over the leather. Not out of greed or amazement exactly, but with the disbelief of someone handling a world made for other people. The car was warm. Too warm at first. Her cheeks flushed almost immediately from the sudden change in temperature. Michael slid into the driver's seat and gave her a piece of paper from the console. "Write your address for me." Annie took the pen slowly, tongue pressed to one side of her mouth as she formed the letters with deep concentration. The handwriting was uneven but clear. She handed the paper forward with both hands. He read the address and felt his expression still. The neighborhood was on the south side. Not the worst part of the city, but poor enough, neglected enough, and all too easy for a man like him to pass 100 times without learning a single street name. He started the engine. For the first several blocks, they rode in silence. Christmas lights slid across the windows in streaks of red, gold, and white. Annie kept the bag tucked tightly against her chest, one hand resting protectively over the top as if she still expected someone to challenge her right to carry it. After a while, Michael said, "Do you and Marcus have a tree?" Annie looked out the window. "A little one. Plastic. Do you decorate it?" "With paper things." She paused. "Mama used to make stars when she had more energy." "Used to." He noticed the tense shift. "What about you?" she asked after a minute. "Do you have a tree?" "Yes." "Big one?" "Yes." "Real or fake?" He glanced at her in the mirror. "Real." She seemed to consider that as serious information. "Does it smell nice?" "Yes." She nodded, satisfied. Then, after a longer silence, she asked the question he should have expected. "Why did you help me?" The city lights flashed over the windshield. A bus rumbled past them, nearly empty. Michael kept his eyes on the road. There were easy answers. Because it was Christmas. Because I could. Because no child should have to do what you did. All of them true. None of them complete. "Finally," he said. "Because you were trying to do something kind for someone else. And because too many people saw that and kept walking." Annie looked down at the bag in her lap. "I thought you were going to keep walking too," she admitted. "So did I," Michael said. That earned him another quick glance. He turned off the main avenue a few minutes later, and the city changed almost block by block. Storefront lights thinned, pavement roughened. Buildings grew older, their brick darkened by weather and years of waiting for repairs that never seemed to come. On one porch, an elderly man in a flannel jacket stood smoking beneath a single yellow bulb. A church sign on the corner promised a Christmas food drive Saturday at noon. Annie sat up straighter. "Over there," she said, pointing. "The brown building." Michael slowed the car. It was a narrow apartment house with peeling paint around the front door and 2 windows lit on the second floor. One of them had a small paper snowflake taped to the glass. Annie's voice grew quieter. "That's ours." Michael parked at the curb, but did not unlock the doors yet. He studied the building for a moment. The neighborhood, the tired stoops and patchy sidewalk and the weak light over the entrance. Then he looked back at Annie in the mirror. "I'll walk you to the door," he said, "and I'll stay outside until your mother says otherwise." Annie nodded, her fingers tightening around the gift bag once more. Whatever this was becoming, Michael understood now. It had already moved beyond a truck and a meal. He had brought her to the edge of her world, and in another moment, that world would open. The front steps were narrower than they had looked from the street, worn smooth in the middle from years of use. Annie climbed them quickly, but not carelessly, the gift bag held close against her coat. Michael's dark scarf still wrapped around her shoulders. Michael followed a step behind, his eyes adjusting to the dim yellow light above the entrance. Up close, the building looked even more tired. The paint around the doorframe had cracked in thin curls. Someone had tried to tape a holiday wreath to the glass at some point, but it now hung at an angle, as if even decoration had lost the energy to stay upright. From somewhere above, he could hear a television playing softly and the unmistakable sound of a child coughing. Annie stopped at the second-floor landing and turned toward apartment 2B. For the first time since getting into the car, she seemed uncertain. "She worries if I'm late," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. Michael gave a small nod. "Then we shouldn't keep her waiting." Annie lifted her hand and knocked twice. Not loudly, just enough. There was movement inside. Then a woman's voice, strained and tired. "Annie?" The door opened only a few inches at first, held by a chain latch. One dark eye appeared in the gap, sharp with worry before it shifted upward, and found Michael standing behind the child. The woman froze. Annie spoke immediately. "Mama, it's okay. He brought me home." That did not reassure her mother nearly as much as Annie had hoped. Michael could see it in the tightening of her jaw, the instinctive way her hand held the door as though ready to close it again if necessary. She looked to be in her early 30s, though illness and strain had added years to her face. Her hair was tied back hastily. She wore an oversized sweatshirt and thick socks, and even from the hallway Michael could hear a roughness in her breathing. "Annie," she said, her voice low and controlled now, the voice of a mother trying not to let fear become panic. "Who is this?" Michael kept his hands visible and his posture deliberately still. "My name is Michael Carter," he said. "Your daughter was at the mall trying to buy a gift for your son. She told me about his birthday. I offered to help, and then I wanted to make sure she got home safely." The mother's eyes moved to the scarf around Annie's shoulders, then to the bag clutched in her hands. Suspicion remained, but confusion had joined it. "You brought her home yourself?" "Yes." Annie took half a step forward. "Mama, I'm sorry I was late. I got Marcus a truck. That changed something. Not enough to erase caution, but enough to let worry crack open and reveal exhaustion underneath." The woman closed her eyes for a brief second, as if steadying herself. When she opened them again, she looked at Annie first. "Are you all right?" Annie nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." Her mother looked back at Michael. "Why?" There it was again. The same question Annie had asked in the car, only this time it came from an adult who had more reason to distrust kindness. Michael did not rush his answer. "Because she was trying to do something good with almost nothing," he said, "and because no 6-year-old should be out alone in the cold trying to solve grown-up problems." The woman's face changed slightly at that. Not softened. Not yet. But she had heard the truth in it. She closed the door long enough to unfasten the chain, then opened it wider. The apartment beyond was small and clean in the way homes often are when dignity is all that stands between a family and despair. The furniture was worn, but cared for. A little artificial Christmas tree stood on a milk crate near the window, decorated with construction paper stars, strips of silver ribbon, and popcorn strung on thread. On the couch lay a folded blanket and a basket of laundry that had been sorted but not yet put away. The air carried the faint smell of menthol, canned soup, and radiator heat. "Come in for a minute," she said, though the invitation sounded more like a necessary courtesy than comfort. Michael stepped inside but remained near the door. A little boy sat on the floor by the couch with a plastic spoon in one hand and the cardboard center of a paper towel roll in the other. He looked up at once. His eyes found Annie, then the bag, and his whole face brightened. "Annie!" He scrambled to his feet in socks that did not match and ran to her without hesitation. Annie knelt immediately, setting the bag down carefully before hugging him with her free arm. "Happy almost birthday," she whispered. Marcus looked at the bag as if it might be magic. For me, Annie nodded, and for the first time since Michael had met her, she seemed fully her age. His mother stepped aside, one hand against the wall for balance. "Marcus, say hello." The boy peered around Annie at Michael, shy for all of 1 second. "Hi." "Hi, Marcus." The woman coughed, then a deep, stubborn cough that caught her in the chest and bent her forward slightly. She pressed a fist to her mouth and waited for it to pass. Annie's head turned instantly. "Mama, you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." Michael had heard enough adults use that phrase to recognize it for what it was, a shield made of habit. Annie reached into her coat pocket and carefully pulled out the half sandwich wrapped in a napkin. "I brought this for you," she said, offering it up with both hands. Her mother stared at it. For one suspended second, no one in the room moved. Michael felt something inside him go still. The woman accepted the sandwich slowly, as if it weighed far more than bread and cheese ever should. Her lips parted, but whatever she meant to say did not come out. She only looked at her daughter, a 6-year-old child who had gone into the world with nothing and returned home carrying food, a gift, and an apology for being late. "I'm gonna open it now," Marcus announced, oblivious to the heaviness in the room. Annie smiled faintly. "Go ahead," He sat cross-legged on the rug and tore at the top of the bag with urgent little hands. When he pulled out the blue truck, the sound he made was somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. "It's blue!" he shouted. "Annie, it's blue!" He held it up with both hands, then immediately dropped to the floor to roll it across the faded rug. The wheels clicked and bounced over the seams in the fabric. His joy filled the room so fast, so completely, that for a moment it seemed to push back against everything else. The cough, the dimness, the tired walls, the careful way adults had learned to ration hope. Michael watched Annie watching her brother. There was no envy in her face, no regret, only relief. As if this exact sound, this exact smile had been what she'd been chasing all day. The mother leaned one hand against the kitchen counter to steady herself. "You really did all this?" Michael turned toward her. "I bought the toy and dinner. That's all." She gave him a look that told him she knew better. To people with resources, it was easy to call generosity small. To people without them, even ordinary kindness arrived with the force of an event. "My name's Denise," she said at last. He nodded. "Michael." She looked embarrassed by the thinness of the apartment, by the mismatched dishes drying near the sink, by the medicine bottles lined neatly beside the microwave as if their visibility itself were some kind of confession. Michael had seen that look before in very different places. People trying to hold on to dignity while assuming the room had already judged them. "You have a nice home," he said. It was the right thing to say. Not because it was polite, but because it was true in the way that mattered. The place was modest, but it held care. The little tree, the folded laundry, the scrubbed counters, the paper snowflake taped to the window. Poverty had worn the edges thin, but it had not erased the effort to make life gentler for the children inside it. Denise exhaled slowly, some part of her shoulders lowering. "It's all right when the heat works." Marcus drove the truck up the leg of the couch and made a loud engine noise. Annie laughed softly and corrected the way he held it so the wheels would grip better. Michael found himself staring at that simple scene with a strange ache in his chest. This was what the city hid in plain sight, he thought. Not failure, not laziness, not the lazy stories people told themselves to stay comfortable. Just families doing impossible arithmetic every day, rent or medicine, bus fare or groceries, honesty or pride, and somehow still hanging paper stars in the window so a child could believe Christmas was coming. Denise must have seen something in his face, because her voice changed when she spoke again. "She shouldn't have gone out alone," she said quietly. "I told her not to." But she heard two women at the laundromat talking about toy donations at the mall. "I fell asleep for a little while after taking my medicine, and when I woke up..." She looked at Annie, then down at the sandwich still in her hand. "Well, there it is. There it is. Not an excuse, not a plea, just the truth laid plainly on the table." Michael glanced toward Annie and Marcus again, then to the medicine bottles on the counter, then back to Denise, and in the quiet of that small apartment, with the little tree glowing weakly by the window and the sound of plastic wheels on worn carpet, he understood what Chapter 5 had only begun to suggest. The truck had never been the real story. The real story was this room, this family, this kind of need, the kind that stayed hidden until a child tried to solve it alone. Michael did not stay long enough to turn kindness into theater. That instinct was old in him. He had spent too many years around people who liked to be seen doing good more than they liked the inconvenience of continuing it after the room stopped watching. So when Marcus became fully absorbed in rolling the blue truck over the rug and Annie settled beside him with the teddy bear in her lap, Michael knew it was time to leave before his presence made the apartment smaller instead of safer. Denise walked him to the door, one hand still wrapped around the folded napkin that held half a sandwich. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said quietly. He glanced back once at the room. Annie was showing Marcus how to back the truck into an imaginary loading dock made from couch cushions. The little tree in the window blinked weakly. A radiator knocked somewhere in the wall like an old man clearing his throat. "No," Michael said. "But I'm glad I did." Denise studied him in the dim hallway light. Up close, the strain in her face was clearer now. The hollowness beneath her eyes, the careful way she stood, as though conserving strength without wanting it noticed. She was not a woman who invited pity. That much was obvious. Pride held her up where sleep and medicine had failed. I don't usually let strangers bring my daughter home, she said. I wouldn't want you to. That almost earned a smile. Almost. She's a good girl, Denise murmured, looking past him toward the stairwell for a moment, as if the walls themselves had heard too many judgments already, and she wanted to say one thing aloud in defiance of them. She shouldn't have to think like she does. Michael did not answer right away. He understood too well the silence between what people deserved and what life required of them. In another world, a fairer one, a cleaner one, Annie would have spent that afternoon making paper decorations or drawing birthday cards, not riding city buses alone to shake a locked toolbox and hope for mercy. She was trying to protect your dignity, he said at last. Denise looked back at him sharply. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for anything for herself. She just kept trying to solve the problem without making anyone feel ashamed. The truth of it landed heavily. Denise pressed her lips together and lowered her gaze to the sandwich in her hand. She got that from the cafe, didn't she? Michael nodded. She saved half. A short, tired breath escaped Denise, something between a laugh and grief. That sounds like Annie. For a moment, they stood without speaking. The hallway smelled faintly of old paint, detergent, and winter air drifting in from the stairwell below. A radio played somewhere in another apartment, low and scratchy, some old soul song about going home. Then Denise spoke again. I'm behind on the electric bill, she said, so quietly he almost missed it. I wasn't going to say that. I wasn't planning to say anything, actually. But since you've already seen enough to know the rest. She lifted one shoulder. The medicine helps some. Not enough to get me through full shifts. I clean offices 3 nights a week when I can. The diner cut my hours last month. And if the church pantry didn't stretch what they give us. She stopped and shook her head. Well, you can see the math. Yes, he thought. He could, not because he had ever lived it exactly this way, but because numbers were still numbers, and hardship had its own arithmetic. A missed shift became a short rent payment. A short rent payment became a late fee. Medicine became less food. Less food became fatigue. Fatigue became mistakes. Mistakes became judgment from people who had never once tried to solve an equation with half the variables missing. Have you applied for assistance? He asked. She let out a dry, humorless breath. Which kind? He said nothing. Food benefits come and go when paperwork gets held up, she continued. Housing told me to wait. The clinic helps when they can. Every office sends you to another office. Every person tells you to call someone else. You spend half your strength proving you're struggling, and the other half trying not to let your children know how bad it is. Michael felt his jaw tighten. He had spent years listening to executives talk about streamlining systems, scaling solutions, eliminating inefficiencies. Yet the systems meant to keep a family from falling apart always seemed to demand the most effort from the people least able to spare it. Denise saw the look in his face and mistook it for discomfort. You don't need to get involved any more than this, she said quickly. I'm grateful. I am. More than you know. But I've had enough people show up for one day, say what a shame it all is, then vanish by morning. It was not accusatory. That made it hit harder. She was not warning him away to protect herself from insult. She was protecting herself from hope. Michael slipped a business card from his wallet and held it out. If you need help with the electric bill, groceries, or medicine, he said, call this number tomorrow morning. Denise looked at the card, but didn't take it immediately. Your office? My direct assistant.
Wait, you're that famous executive.
My direct assistant. Her eyes narrowed slightly. And what exactly am I asking for when I call? Whatever keeps Annie from having to go solve another adult problem alone. At that, she took the card. She turned it over, reading the embossed name beneath the hallway light. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Michael Carter. Recognition. Not complete at first, then all at once. You're that Carter, she said. He had heard versions of that sentence in hotel lobbies, gala dinners, boardrooms, and charity auctions. Usually it came with calculation, flattery, resentment, or some blend of all three. In Denise's voice, it held only disbelief. Yes, she looked from the card to him, then back again. The one on television, sometimes, the company downtown, the software contracts. He gave a single nod. Denise shook her head once, slowly, almost to herself. Lord, it was not admiration. It was the sound people made when life became strange enough to feel briefly unreal. "I'm not giving this to you because of who I am," he said. "I'm giving it to you because of who your daughter is." That brought her back. She closed her fingers around the card. "You saw that in one afternoon?" Michael glanced toward the apartment again, where Marcus had begun making crashing noises with the truck and Annie was laughing softly, trying to shush him for fear of bothering neighbors. "Some things don't take long," he said. From inside, Annie's voice rose clear enough to reach them. "Mama, is he leaving?" Denise turned toward the open doorway. In a minute, Annie appeared in the hall almost immediately, the teddy bear now tucked under one arm. Michael's scarf still swallowed her shoulders. She looked first at him, then at her mother, reading the room with that same careful intelligence he had noticed from the start. "You forgot your scarf," she said. He looked down at it, then back at her. "Keep it." Her fingers tightened around the wool. "It's really nice." "So are you," he said before he could edit the thought into something safer. The words surprised both of them. Annie lowered her eyes, but not before he saw something flicker there. Something tender and wounded at once, like a child hearing a language she had always wanted to understand. "I'll bring it back," she said. "You can keep it until winter's over." She nodded once, solemnly, as though accepting not an accessory but a temporary treaty with the season. Michael moved toward the stairs, but Annie stepped forward again. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Denise's face changed instantly at the question. Not out of anger, but out of dread. Hope, once named aloud, became far more dangerous. Michael knew that. He knew also that promises made lightly were a form of theft, so he chose his words carefully. "Yes," he said. "If your mother calls." Annie looked to Denise. Denise looked at the card in her hand. A small family's future had narrowed, for one brief second, to that rectangle of paper and the decision whether to trust it. Michael descended the stairs into the cold night with the strange sensation that he had left something behind and carried something away at the same time. In the car, he sat without starting the engine, his hands resting on the wheel as the windshield gathered a thin fog from the heat inside. The street outside Denise's building was quiet. A porch light flickered across the road. Somewhere farther down the block, a siren rose and fell, then disappeared into the city. He thought of Annie shaking the toy box, of Denise holding half a sandwich as if it were proof of both love and failure, of Marcus driving a blue truck across a tired rug like joy itself had wheels. Then his phone lit up on the console, 3 missed calls from his assistant, 2 text messages from the board chairman, 1 email marked urgent. The other life was waiting. The polished one, the scheduled one, the one that always knew his next move before he made it. Michael stared at the screen a moment, then turned it face down. For the first time in years, his world no longer seemed divided between what mattered and what paid. Now there was a third category, what could not be ignored. By 9 the next morning, Michael had already sat through 2 meetings, rejected a merger proposal, and signed off on a legal review worth more money than Annie's family would likely see in several lifetimes. None of it stayed with him. Figures moved across the screen in the executive conference room. Forecasts, margins, strategic growth maps clean. Impressive things shaped by people who believed every problem could be translated into numbers if you stared at it long enough. Michael had spent 20 years becoming fluent in that language. Usually it steadied him. Today it felt hollow. He sat at the head of the table while a vice president explained projected expansion into 3 new markets. Heads nodded. Pens moved. Coffee cooled in white porcelain cups. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Chicago glittered under a cold, bright sky. Michael's mind returned, again and again, to a second-floor apartment on the south side. A little artificial tree, paper stars, half a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. "Michael," he looked up. Everyone at the table had gone quiet. The vice president cleared his throat. "Do you want us to move forward with the revised terms?" For one fraction of a second, Michael didn't know what revised terms he meant. That had never happened to him before. "Yes," he said evenly, because experience had taught him how to sound certain even when his attention had wandered. With the liability clause restored, no concessions on enforcement, the tension in the room eased. Pens moved again. The meeting continued, but his assistant, Claire, noticed. Claire noticed everything. She was waiting just outside the conference room when the meeting ended. holding a leather folder against her navy blazer. In her 50s, silver blonde, and composed in the manner of someone who had spent years cleaning up other people's chaos without ever creating any of her own, she fell into step beside him as he walked toward his office. "You've ignored 6 calls from the chairman since 8 this morning," she said. "I know. And you asked me to reschedule your lunch without explanation." "I know that too." Claire glanced sideways at him. "Would this be the moment when you tell me why you were on the south side last night?" Michael stopped walking. Claire stopped with him. "How do you know I was on the south side?" She raised one brow. "Because your car's location pings to the building garage, and when it doesn't return until after 9, I ask questions before other people do." He almost smiled. "Almost. In that case," he said, resuming his pace, "I need a utility payment made today." Quietly. "Also, groceries delivered. And I want a private clinic referral for a woman named Denise Walker. Respiratory issues. Probably untreated longer than they should have been." Claire absorbed that without visible surprise, though her silence sharpened slightly. "Address?" He handed her the slip of paper Annie had written on the night before. Claire looked down at it, then back up at him. "You met someone?" "Yes." "A child?" Michael said nothing. Claire's expression changed just enough to confirm she already knew the answer. She had worked for him 12 years. She knew the difference between his business tone and the one he used when something had breached the walls he kept around his personal life. "I'll take care of it," she said, discreetly. Of course, he should have left it there, should have gone into his office, returned the chairman's calls, and resumed the machinery of his day. Instead, he asked, "Can you find out what the current threshold is before the utility company issues a shut-off warning?" Claire looked at him for a long second. "Yes," she said gently, "I can." By noon, the first delivery had already reached Denise's building. Michael knew because Claire sent a one-line message to his private phone. "Groceries delivered." Electric balance cleared. "Clinic appointment available Thursday if accepted." He stared at the screen longer than necessary, not with satisfaction. Relief, maybe. But relief was only useful when a problem had been solved. This one had only been softened. Across town, Denise stood in the narrow kitchen of her apartment, staring at 2 paper grocery bags on the counter as if they might vanish if she blinked too hard. Milk, eggs, bread, soup, rice, chicken, canned vegetables, fresh fruit, a box of pancake mix, cough drops, children's vitamins, tea, a small bakery cake with white frosting and blue trim that read "Happy Birthday, Marcus" in neat, careful lettering. The delivery man had only said it was paid for, nothing more. Marcus had danced in circles around the table when he saw the cake. Annie had stood absolutely still, one hand on the back of a chair, watching her mother's face instead of the food. "Mama?" she asked cautiously. "Is it okay?" Denise looked at the business card still lying near the microwave. Michael Carter. The neat black lettering had seemed almost unreal in her hand last night. It felt no more ordinary in daylight. "It's okay," Denise said, though she sounded unconvinced by her own voice. Annie moved a little closer. "Did you call?" Denise hesitated. Yes. It was not the full truth. She had not called right away. Pride had delayed her, so had fear. But by 10 o'clock, after staring at the card through half a cup of weak coffee and another coughing spell that left her gripping the sink for breath, she had dialed the number. Claire had answered with calm efficiency, as if women from fraying apartment buildings called all the time on behalf of daughters who met billionaires beside locked toy boxes. There had been no pity in the woman's tone. Denise was more grateful for that than she could have explained. Still, help arriving this quickly felt dangerous. Fast help could be withdrawn just as fast. She knew that from experience. "What did you tell them?" Annie asked. "The truth," Denise said. That answer seemed to settle Annie more than any reassurance could have. But truth had a way of traveling farther than anyone intended. At 2:30 that afternoon, a social worker named Karen Bell received an email forwarded from a school attendance clerk, who had received it from a parent volunteer, who had received it from a woman in a neighborhood Facebook group. The subject line read, "Does anyone know this child?" Attached was a short video. It had been taken in the mall the previous evening by a teenager standing near the bookstore escalator. The footage was shaky, badly lit, and less than a minute long, but it showed enough. A small black girl in a thin coat, a tall white man in an expensive overcoat crouching beside her, a toy store bag in her hand, someone off camera whispering, "That's Michael Carter, isn't it?" Then the clip ended. By the time it reached Karen Bell, the caption had already changed 3 times. At first, "Sweetest thing I saw all week." Then, "Billionaire helps little girl at mall." Then, inevitably, "Anybody know why a rich man is taking home a child that isn't his?" Karen had worked long enough in child services to distrust both sentiment and scandal. The internet was full of people turning partial truths into entertainment. Still, the school clerk's note beneath the email gave her pause. Possible ID match for Annie Walker, age 6. Prior attendance concerns. Mother flagged for follow-up wellness review. Karen opened the Walker file. It was thin, which in some offices meant manageable. In hers, it usually meant neglected. Single mother. 2 children. Irregular school attendance. Utility instability reported once the previous winter. No confirmed abuse. No formal removal history. 1 missed home visit due to unable to access building. Another marked postponed. 3 transfers between clinics. Income inconsistent. Karen leaned back in her chair. No smoking gun, no dramatic crisis, just the slow accumulation of risk, the kind that could become an emergency overnight, then leave everyone claiming they had no warning. She clicked the video again. The child in the frame held herself with a kind of caution Karen had seen too often in children who were trying not to become a problem. The man beside her, if that was Michael Carter, looked attentive, controlled, impossible to read from such a short clip. Karen picked up the phone. At 4 o'clock, there was a knock at Denise Walker's door. Annie looked up from the floor, where Marcus was making the blue truck haul crayons across the rug as if they were bricks. Denise was sitting at the table with an unopened envelope from the utility company and a half-finished intake form Claire had arranged for the clinic. Her chest tightened before she even stood. Some knocks carried a certain weight. She opened the door to find a woman in a camel coat, holding a badge wallet and a slim file folder. "Miss Walker?" Denise's fingers tightened around the doorknob. "Yes, my name is Karen Bell. I'm with Child and Family Services. I'd like to speak with you for a few minutes, if now is all right." In the room behind Denise, Marcus pushed the truck into the leg of the couch and made a crashing sound. Annie had gone completely still. Denise felt the blood drain from her face, not because she had done something wrong, because poor mothers in America did not need to do something wrong to be afraid of that badge. Karen's gaze shifted past Denise just enough to take in the apartment, the children, the grocery bags on the counter, the little tree by the window, the tension that arrived before she ever crossed the threshold. "This doesn't have to be difficult," Karen said in the professional tone of someone trying to lower the temperature before it rose. But Annie had already heard enough in adults' voices to recognize the danger beneath polite words. She stood slowly, one hand resting on Marcus's shoulder, and in that instant, before anyone had stepped inside, the fragile piece Michael had brought into the apartment the night before began to tremble under the weight of the system finally turning its head. Karen Bell did not step inside until Denise moved aside. Even then, she entered with the deliberate caution of someone who knew her presence alone could change the air in a room. She was in her 40s, neatly dressed, her dark hair pinned back at the nape of her neck, a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. Nothing about her seemed aggressive. That was the problem. In Denise's experience, the people who could alter a family's future rarely needed to raise their voices. "Thank you," Karen said quietly. Denise shut the door behind her, though every instinct in her body resisted the sound of the latch catching. Marcus looked up from the rug, one hand still gripping the blue truck. "Who's that?" he asked. "A lady here to talk," Denise said, too quickly. Annie remained standing beside her brother, one small hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Michael had noticed that instinct at the mall. Annie always seemed to position herself between danger and someone smaller than she was. Now, in the narrow living room, the gesture looked even more heartbreaking. Karen took in the apartment with one practiced sweep of her eyes. Not rudely, not hungrily, but thoroughly. The grocery bags on the counter, the medicine bottles near the microwave, the little tree by the window, the children, the thinness of everything. "I know this can feel unsettling," she began. Denise crossed her arms. "That depends on what you're here for." Karen nodded, as if the answer were fair. "A concern was forwarded to our office this afternoon. There was a video from the mall last night. Your daughter was identified, and because your family already had a pending wellness review, the report was flagged for follow-up. Denise's face tightened. A video. A video. Karen opened the folder but did not yet remove anything. It appears Annie was alone in a public place after dark, and later left with an adult male not listed in your household. At that, Annie spoke for the first time. He brought me home, she said. Her voice was steady, but Karen turned to her with the softened caution adults used when talking to children in delicate situations. I understand that's what happened, Karen said, and I'm glad you got home safely. He bought Marcus a truck, Annie added, as if that explained the moral structure of the whole universe. Karen's expression shifted, only slightly. I see. Denise let out a breath through her nose. Her brother's birthday is today. She heard there was a charity toy box at the mall. I fell asleep after taking my medicine, and she slipped out. That's on me. But he didn't take her. He helped her. Karen met Denise's gaze. Do you know this man well? No. Have you met him before last night? No. Did he enter the home? Denise hesitated, and Karen noticed. Yes, Denise said at last, for a few minutes, long enough for me to thank him. That's all. Karen made a note. The scratch of her pen against paper seemed too loud for such a small room. Marcus rolled the truck across the rug again, less loudly now, sensing something in the room he could not name. Annie stayed close beside him, her eyes moving between her mother and the social worker with a watchfulness no 6-year-old should have needed. Karen looked toward the children, then back at Denise. Would it be all right if we sat? Denise gave a small, restrained gesture toward the table. Karen took the chair nearest the door. Denise remained standing for another moment before sitting opposite her, as though sitting might suggest comfort where there was none. I want to be transparent, Karen said. I'm not here with a removal order. I'm here to assess safety. Poor mothers in America, Denise thought, learned very quickly that those two sentences lived much closer together than anyone admitted. What does that mean? She asked. It means I need to understand the circumstances in the home, Karen said. Income, supervision, medical stability, food access, school attendance, whether there are safe arrangements for the children when you're ill. The words were clinical and orderly. Their impact was not. Denise glanced at Annie and Marcus. Could you two go sit by the tree for a minute? Annie did not want to move. That was obvious. But she nodded once and guided Marcus toward the corner near the window. He took the truck with him. Annie sat on the floor with the teddy bear in her lap, close enough to hear, quiet enough to pretend she wasn't listening. Karen began asking questions. Denise answered them all. Yes, she had missed work. Yes, her hours had been cut. Yes, she had fallen behind on bills before yesterday. Yes, the children had missed school days when she was too sick to walk Annie to the bus stop and too ashamed to call for help again. No, there was no drug use. No, no one had harmed the children. Yes, there had been days when pantry food ran low. No, she had not meant for Annie to leave the house alone. Each truth seemed to shrink the room further. Karen listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, occasionally writing. Her face gave very little away, which Denise almost preferred. False sympathy would have been harder to bear. When Karen asked about the groceries and the paid utility balance, Denise told the truth again. A man named Michael Carter, whom Annie had met at the mall, had arranged assistance after Denise called the number on his card. Karen's pen paused. Michael Carter, she repeated. Yes. The CEO? Denise's laugh was brief and brittle. That's the one. Karen leaned back slightly. In her line of work, sudden outside involvement from wealthy strangers could mean many things, and not all of them were good. Yet the apartment in front of her did not read like fraud or manipulation. It read like exhaustion, pride, a mother trying to keep her children fed and seen, and a daughter stepping into responsibilities far too large for her age. Still, the system did not operate on feeling. It operated on indicators, and too many of them were present. Karen closed the folder halfway and looked toward Annie. Would it be all right if I asked your daughter a couple of questions? Denise stiffened. Do I have a choice? Karen's expression remained composed. You can say no, but it may delay the review and require a second visit. There it was. Choice in theory, consequence in practice. Denise looked at Annie. Annie looked back, already understanding far more than she should. "It's okay, Mama," she said softly. "No," Denise thought. "It isn't," but she nodded. Karen turned her chair slightly. "Annie, can you come sit over here with me for a minute?" Annie rose carefully. Marcus started to follow, but she pressed the teddy bear into his arms and whispered something that made him stay. Then she came to the table and sat in the chair nearest her mother. Karen lowered her voice a little. "Can you tell me why you went to the mall yesterday?" "To get Marcus a birthday present." "Did your mother tell you to go?" "No, ma'am." "Did you tell her first?" Annie looked down at her hands. "Not really." Karen glanced at Denise, then back to Annie. "Were you afraid at the mall?" Annie thought about that. "No." Karen waited. Then Annie added, "Not until people started noticing." The answer hung in the room. Karen asked a few more questions, each one simple on its face and heavy underneath. "Did Annie feel safe at home?" "Yes." "Did she ever go hungry?" "Sometimes. But Mama always made something." "Did she know the man from the mall before yesterday?" "No." "Why did she go with him?" "Because he said he'd stay outside first, and because he talked like he meant things." That answer caught Karen off guard. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. Annie shrugged. "Some grown-ups say nice things fast. He said things slow." Denise closed her eyes for one brief second. Karen wrote nothing that time. She only looked at the child in front of her, a little girl who had already learned to distinguish between performance and sincerity, between politeness and safety, between a promise and a man who might keep one. When the questions ended, Annie returned to Marcus without being told. He immediately leaned against her shoulder. The truck balanced across his knees. Karen closed the folder at last. "I'm going to be honest with you, Miss Walker," she said. Denise braced. "There are enough risk factors here that I have to file this as an active family review." The words landed exactly as Denise had feared they would. "What does that mean?" she asked again, but this time her voice was smaller. "It means there will be follow-up visits, verification of income and medical treatment, school coordination, a home safety assessment. And if I fail?" Karen did not flinch from the question. "Then the department considers next steps." Denise looked toward her children. Marcus had begun driving the truck up Annie's shin, narrating quietly to himself. Annie, however, was staring straight at Karen, and for the first time fear was plain on her face. Not fear for herself, fear of separation. Denise's throat tightened. "My children are not being taken from me because I got sick and poor." Karen's voice softened, but not enough to make the words gentle. "No one wants that outcome." Denise laughed once, hollow and sharp. "That's what people always say before they explain the paperwork." Karen stood, folder in hand. "I'll leave my card," she said. "I need proof of your clinic appointment and recent pay history within 48 hours. She placed the card on the table beside Michael's. 2 pieces of cardstock, 2 different kinds of power. When she reached the door, she paused and looked back at the children. Her face changed, then not officially. Not enough to alter anything, but enough to show that behind the training and procedure, a woman still existed in there somewhere. "Happy birthday, Marcus," she said quietly. Marcus lifted the truck in response, not understanding why the room still felt wrong. After she left, silence flooded the apartment. Denise remained at the table, one hand pressed flat against the wood as if the world had tilted and she needed to steady it. Annie came to her slowly. "Mama?" Denise looked up, and Annie saw at once what no child should have to see in a parent's face, fear so deep it had stripped away all the effort to hide it. "Did I mess it up?" Annie whispered. Denise pulled her into her arms so quickly the chair scraped against the floor. Marcus climbed in too, the blue truck trapped awkwardly between them. "No," Denise said, though her voice broke around the word. "No, baby, no." But outside, beyond the little tree and the paper stars and the weak winter light at the window, the system had already begun to move, and once it moved, love alone was rarely enough to stop it. Michael was in the middle of a quarterly risk briefing when Claire entered without knocking. That alone was enough to shift the room. In 12 years, she had interrupted exactly 3 meetings, and every person seated around the polished walnut table knew it. The chief financial officer stopped speaking mid-sentence. 2 board members looked up sharply. Someone near the end of the table lowered his pen. Claire crossed to Michael's side with the same measured composure she brought to everything, but when she placed a folded note beside his hand, Her eyes told him this was not a scheduling issue. He opened it. Child and Family Services visited Walker home this afternoon. Active Family Review opened. Denise called. She sounded frightened. For one brief, dangerous second, the room disappeared. He saw instead a small apartment with paper stars in the window, Annie's hand on her brother's shoulder, Denise standing in a doorway trying to look stronger than her body allowed. He saw, with perfect clarity, how quickly help could be reinterpreted by a system that mistrusted poverty and spectacle in equal measure. "Michael," the CFO said carefully, "should we continue?" He folded the note once, laid it flat beside his water glass, and stood. "No," he said. "We're done." A board member frowned. "We're not done." Michael buttoned his jacket. "I am." The silence that followed was the brittle kind, expensive and offended. Richard Sloan, the board chairman, leaned back in his chair with a look that suggested long practice at disapproval. He was 70, silver-haired, disciplined, and allergic to anything he could not classify as prudent. "Is this about the child?" he asked. The question landed like a slap, mostly because of the word choice. Michael turned slowly. "What child?" Sloane's expression hardened. "Don't insult the room. There's a video circulating. You, in a mall, with a little girl. Claire's been fielding calls all morning. Reporters are sniffing around. Now you walk out of a risk meeting because of a note. I'm asking a direct question." Michael looked around the table. 12 people. Educated, connected, powerful. The kind of people who spoke about communities in annual reports and human capital in investor letters. Not one of them knew Annie's name. "Yes," Michael said. "It's about Annie Walker." A younger board member, Daniel Price, exhaled through his nose. "So there is something to this." Michael's gaze snapped to him. "There is a 6-year-old girl whose family is being reviewed by Child Services because she went to a mall trying to find a birthday present for her brother. That is what there is to this." No one spoke. Sloan steepled his fingers. "And what exactly is your involvement?" "I helped her." "That isn't an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now." Price leaned forward. "With respect, Michael, that's not good enough. If there's liability exposure," Michael cut him off. "Liability exposure?" The temperature in the room dropped. He rarely raised his voice. He did not need to. The edge in it now was enough. A child buys a gift for her brother with help from a stranger, and your first instinct is liability? "My first instinct," Price said, trying to recover his footing, "is to protect the company." Michael held his stare for a beat longer than comfort allowed. "That," he said coldly, "is exactly the problem." He left before anyone could answer. Claire was already walking beside him by the time he reached the elevator. "I have Denise's number," she said. "She called an hour ago but didn't want to interrupt. I told her you were in meetings." Michael pressed the button harder than necessary. "Get me family law, the best we have." "Already called." He glanced at her. Claire kept her eyes ahead. "I know you." The elevator doors opened. They stepped in alone. "She needs immediate representation," Michael said. "Not tomorrow. Today." Claire nodded. "Harper and Levin sent over a partner. Susan Levin herself is free at 4. Clear it." "It's done." The doors shut. For a moment there was only the hum of dissent. Then, Claire said quietly, "The clip online is spreading." Michael's jaw tightened. "How bad?" "Not scandal bad. Not yet. Half the comments call you a hero. The other half think it's staged. A smaller group wants to know why a billionaire was alone with a child from a low-income neighborhood." He let out a slow breath. "And the board? Concerned." "Of course they are." Claire waited a beat. "Do you want public relations looped in?" "No. That won't stop them from preparing. I'm not interested in preparing optics." "I know." She glanced at him then. "But optics may arrive whether you invite them or not." He knew she was right. He hated that she was right. By 4 o'clock, Susan Levin sat across from him in his private office, a legal pad open on one knee and Denise's intake summary on the table between them. She was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed, elegantly dressed, and possessed the kind of calm that suggested she had seen institutions behave badly often enough to stop being surprised by it. "She's not at immediate removal threshold based on what I'm seeing," Susan said, tapping the page lightly. "But she's vulnerable." Michael stood at the window, looking down at the city without seeing it. Define vulnerable. Poor. Sick. Intermittent employment. Prior attendance concerns. An outside event that triggered formal review. If the caseworker is reasonable, this becomes monitoring and service compliance. If the caseworker is overburdened, politically pressured, or trying to protect herself from future blame, she may overcorrect. Michael turned. Meaning? Meaning families like hers get judged not only on harm, but on the possibility of future harm. Systems love possibility. It gives them room to act without ever admitting they're punishing poverty. The truth of that sat heavily in the room. She needs a clinic appointment verified, pay history organized, utility records documented, and preferably an advocate present at the next visit. Susan continued. Someone who knows the language of the system. Then she has one. Susan studied him for a moment. You understand your presence complicates things. Yes, you're famous enough to make every move look strategic. I don't care. She gave him a dry look. That's not how public narratives work. Then I'll care later. That, at last, earned the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth. I'll go to the apartment this evening, she said. I'll explain the process, help her gather what matters, and make sure no one intimidates her with paperwork. Michael nodded once. And you? She asked. He glanced back toward the window. I'm going too. Susan closed the folder. As counsel, I should tell you that may intensify attention. As a man, he said, I'm telling you I'm not staying in this office while they sit in that apartment, wondering whether they're about to lose everything. She held his gaze, measured him, then said simply, Then when we go, you let me do the talking first. At dusk, the black car pulled up once more outside Denise's building. The neighborhood looked colder than it had the night before, though perhaps that was only because Michael knew what waited upstairs. A porch light flickered across the street. Somewhere nearby, children shouted over a basketball game in a church parking lot before the sound disappeared into the wind. Denise opened the door before they knocked, as if she had been standing just inside listening for footsteps. Her relief at seeing Michael lasted only a second before embarrassment replaced it. I'm sorry I called, she said immediately. I know you're busy, and I know this is not your problem, and I shouldn't have. It is my problem now, Michael said. The words came out more forcefully than he intended, but Denise fell silent. Susan stepped forward and offered her hand. Susan Levin, I'm an attorney. Mr. Carter asked me to come explain what the review means and what it does not mean. Denise stared at the hand a second before taking it. Inside, the apartment looked much as it had the night before. Only the atmosphere had changed completely. Fear had a way of making even familiar rooms feel temporary. The grocery bags were half unpacked now. The birthday cake sat on the counter untouched. Marcus was asleep on the couch under a blanket, one arm curled around the blue truck. Annie sat beside him on the floor, the teddy bear in her lap, her back straight with the effort of staying awake. When she saw Michael, she stood. Did they come because of me? She asked. No greeting, no preamble, just the wound itself. Michael crossed the room and crouched to her level. No, he said. They came because the world is too quick to question families when they're struggling and too slow to help before they are. Annie searched his face. Mama cried. He looked past her to Denise, who was already looking away. I know, he said softly. Annie lowered her eyes to the bear's ribbon. I didn't mean to make trouble. Michael felt anger rise in him again, clean and cold. Not at her. Never at her. At every system, every polished office, every comfortable person who let children learn the language of blame before they learned long division. You didn't, he said. Listen to me. You did not. Susan was already at the kitchen table spreading out papers with efficient calm. Clinic referral, utility confirmation, contact forms, a legal pad for notes. Denise sat down slowly, looking like someone approaching a medical diagnosis she did not want but could not refuse. Here is what happens next, Susan said. And here is how we make sure no one confuses hardship with neglect. Michael stayed where he was beside Annie, one knee against the worn rug, the little tree blinking near the window. For the first time since this began, he was no longer merely reacting. He was preparing to fight, and somewhere deep inside him, Beneath the anger and the urgency and the unfamiliar protectiveness that had taken root almost overnight, another truth was beginning to harden into certainty. The line he had crossed with Annie at the mall was not behind him anymore. It was the line between witness and responsibility, and he had no intention of stepping back. Susan Levin stayed for nearly 2 hours. By the time she closed her legal pad, Denise's kitchen table had transformed from a place of unpaid envelopes and medicine bottles into something steadier, an improvised command center against panic. Copies of clinic forms were stacked neatly beside proof of the utility payment. A list of Denise's work shifts, handwritten at first and then rewritten more clearly at Susan's insistence, sat clipped to the top of a folder. A yellow sticky note held the time of Thursday's clinic appointment. Another listed the documents Karen Bell had requested within 48 hours. Paper matters because paper survives emotion, Susan said, sliding the stack into order. You may be frightened. You may be tired. You may be angry. The paperwork cannot afford to be any of those things. Denise nodded, though exhaustion had begun to hollow her out again. She looked like a woman forcing herself upright through sheer will, refusing to let fear become visible enough for anyone to name it a weakness. Marcus slept on the couch, the blue truck still pinned beneath one arm. Annie had not fallen asleep, though Michael could see fatigue in the way she leaned slightly against the side of the sofa now. The teddy bear gathered to her chest. Every so often her eyes moved to her mother, then to Susan, then to Michael, as if she were making sure all the important adults remained where they were supposed to be. The apartment felt smaller at night, but also more honest. The little tree in the window cast a faint glow over the paper stars. The old radiator clicked and hissed. Somewhere in the building a baby cried, then quieted. The city outside was still moving, but in here time had narrowed to forms, signatures, and the precise language needed to keep a family intact. Susan capped her pen and looked directly at Denise. I want to be very clear about something, she said. Nothing I've seen here suggests your children are unsafe because they are unloved. The state knows that. The problem is that systems often confuse instability with danger when poor families are involved. Denise's hands, clasped tightly on the table, loosened for the first time. They make it sound the same, she said. Yes, Susan replied. And it isn't. Michael stood near the window, one shoulder against the wall, listening. He had spent his adult life in a world where the right language could move markets, settle disputes, avert disaster. Here, language seemed to serve a different purpose. To stop power from translating hardship into accusation. Susan glanced at him. Mr. Carter, I'm going to advise you again to keep your contact careful. Helpful, yes. Visible, no. Denise lowered her eyes at once, as if ashamed that visibility itself had become part of the risk. Michael crossed the room and pulled out the chair opposite Susan. I'm not interested in making this worse for them. I believe that, Susan said. But belief doesn't change optics. The video from the mall is still circulating. Your board has already heard of it. If the press gets enough of a story, they'll turn this family into a symbol before anyone asks whether they want to be one. Denise looked up at that. The press? Michael answered before Susan could. Not yet. This can still stay small. Can, he thought, was doing a dangerous amount of work in that sentence. Annie had been silent for so long that when she spoke, all three adults turned. Why do grown-ups keep making everything bigger? She asked. No one answered immediately. It was not a childish question. It was too precise for that. Annie sat beside her sleeping brother in a too-small apartment under a weak Christmas tree, asking the sort of thing people usually spent decades learning not to ask out loud. Susan's expression softened first. Sometimes, she said, choosing her words carefully. Grown-ups get afraid of being blamed later, and when they get afraid, they start pulling at every thread, even if that thread is holding someone together. Annie considered that. That's stupid, she said quietly. To Michael's surprise, Susan almost smiled. Yes, she said. Sometimes it is. A little after 8:30, Susan rose to leave. She gave Denise her direct number, repeated the time of the clinic appointment, and made her promise twice that she would not speak to any caseworker alone again if she could help it. At the door, Denise stopped her. How much do I owe you? Susan shook her head once. Nothing tonight. Denise's chin lifted, pride reasserting itself even through fatigue.
You're not wrong.
I don't like owing things I can't repay. Michael recognized the line immediately. Annie had inherited more than her mother's eyes. Susan's reply was gentle but firm. Then don't think of it as a debt. Think of it as someone refusing to let the wrong people write your story. After she left, silence settled back into the apartment. But it was not the same silence that had followed Karen Bell's visit. Fear remained, certainly, yet now it had structure around it. A plan. A thin railing to hold while crossing uncertain ground. Denise stood at the sink, rinsing out 2 cups that did not need rinsing. Michael watched her for a moment before saying, "You should sit down." "I've been sitting down all day," she replied. He heard the real meaning. "I've been helpless long enough." He let that stand. Annie had moved closer to Marcus and was carefully pulling the blanket higher over his shoulders. Michael came over and crouched beside the couch again. "You should be asleep too," he said. She shook her head. "If I sleep, tomorrow gets here faster." That stopped him. "Is that bad?" Her fingers traced the red ribbon at the teddy bear's neck. "Tomorrow means people come back." He looked toward the table where Karen's card still lay beside his. 2 rectangles of cardstock. 2 entirely different promises. "Yes," he said. "Tomorrow probably means that." Annie's eyes lifted to his. "Will you come back too?" Michael did not answer instantly. He was learning, slowly and not comfortably, that Annie heard hesitation the way some children heard thunder early, accurately, and with good reason. "Yes," he said. This time the word came without condition. Annie studied him, perhaps noticing the difference. Then she gave the smallest nod and rested her cheek briefly against the arm of the couch. It was not surrender. Exactly. It was what trust looked like when it arrived, 1 careful inch at a time. Denise turned from the sink. "You've done enough." Michael stood. "No," he said softly. "I really haven't." She looked at him for a long moment, then glanced around the apartment, as if seeing it through his eyes might make it less exposed. The old couch. The medicine bottles. The half-unpacked groceries. The birthday cake waiting untouched on the counter because no one had remembered to celebrate after Karen Bell knocked. Her face changed. "Oh God," she murmured. Michael followed her gaze. The cake. Blue trim. White frosting. "Happy birthday, Marcus." In the scramble of fear and paperwork and legal explanations, the actual child who had turned 4 that day had fallen asleep before anyone had lit a candle. Annie saw it too. "Mama." Denise pressed a hand to her mouth, grief and guilt flaring together so sharply that for a second Michael thought she might crumple under the weight of both. "I forgot," she whispered. "Lord, I forgot his birthday." Annie was off the floor at once. "No, you didn't forget," she said, though of course they all knew she had. "We can still do it. We can." Marcus stirred at the sound of her voice but did not wake. Michael stepped to the counter, opened the box, and looked around the kitchen drawers until he found a single thin candle tucked beside some takeout menus and a roll of tape. Denise laughed once through tears. "That's left over from Annie's last birthday," she said. "Then it'll do," Michael answered. He set the candle into the frosting while Annie gently shook Marcus awake. "Hey," she whispered. "Birthday boy. Wake up a little." Marcus blinked in confusion, hair flattened on one side, truck still trapped under his arm. "What?" Annie smiled, tired and radiant all at once. "We still have cake." Denise turned off the kitchen light. The tree by the window kept blinking in soft red and gold, and Michael lit the candle. Its tiny flame seemed absurdly small in the room after everything the day had demanded of them. And yet, when Marcus saw it, his whole face opened. "For me?" "For you," Denise said, her voice breaking. They sang softly so as not to wake the neighbors. 4 imperfect voices in a worn apartment on a cold Chicago night. Michael did not remember the last time he had sung Happy Birthday without a reservation in his chest, without checking a watch, without wondering what came next. Marcus blew out the candle in one fierce breath and laughed when the smoke curled upward. Annie clapped. Denise wiped her eyes and laughed too. Embarrassed by the tears even as more of them came, Michael stood a little apart and watched the scene settle around him with a force he could not have explained to anyone from his other life. This, he thought, was what systems never measured. Not just whether a family had enough, but what it cost them to keep loving each other when they didn't. Marcus took the first bite of cake and immediately announced it was the best one, which Annie accepted as objective truth. Denise cut 4 uneven slices. Michael tried to refuse his portion and was ignored with enough determination that he took the plate without argument. For 10 whole minutes, the apartment belonged to something other than fear. Then Michael's phone vibrated. He almost left it where it was. Almost, but the screen lit the dark room just enough for Claire's name to show. He stepped into the hallway outside the apartment before answering. "Tell me." Claire's voice was controlled, which meant the news was not good. "A reporter called the office asking for comment on your involvement with the Walker family. They mentioned the mall video, the grocery delivery, and a possible legal intervention." Someone is talking. Michael looked back through the partly open door. Inside, Annie was helping Marcus keep frosting off the truck box. Denise was smiling at something Marcus said, though the fatigue still sat in the corners of her face like shadow. "What paper?" Michael asked. "The Tribune hasn't called. This is a digital outlet first, maybe trying to shop it wider. But it won't stay small much longer." Michael closed his eyes for one brief second. The next wave had arrived, and this time, it wasn't the state knocking. It was the rest of the world. Michael stayed in the hallway only long enough to hear the shape of the problem. "They have names?" he asked. "Not yet," Claire said, "but they have enough fragments to build a story." The mall clip. A source inside Outreach who mentioned the toy store. Someone from the utility company confirming a payment was made. And now a reporter is asking whether you've retained counsel on behalf of the family. Michael looked down the dim stairwell, then back through the cracked open apartment door. Inside, Marcus was licking frosting from the side of his thumb. Annie was smiling, though the smile carried the tired caution of a child who had learned joy could be interrupted at any moment. Denise sat at the table with her paper plate untouched, watching both children the way mothers do when they know peace is borrowed. "Did you answer?" he asked. "No comment," Claire said. For now isn't good enough. It's the only thing that buys time." He exhaled slowly. "Find out who's leaking." "I'm already trying." He knew she was. Claire did not wait for storms to prove they were real. "And Michael," she added, her voice lowering, "the board chairman wants an emergency call tonight. Then he can want it. That won't make him go away." "No," Michael said, eyes still on the doorway. "It won't." When he stepped back inside the apartment, Annie looked up first. She always seemed to know when the temperature in a room had changed, even before anyone spoke. "Was that work?" she asked. "Yes." Her eyes searched his face. "Bad work?" He should have lied. Should have softened it. Hidden the next blow for one more hour. But Annie had already endured too many adults who used false comfort as a kind of delay. "Maybe," he said. Denise set down her fork. "What happened?" Michael pulled out the chair nearest the door but did not sit. "A reporter called my office. Someone's talking about your family." The room went very still. Marcus, too young to understand, drove his finger through a streak of frosting on his plate and licked it absently. Annie's hand moved to the back of his couch cushion as if grounding herself through something solid. Denise's face emptied first, then hardened. "I knew it," she said quietly. "I knew this was too fast. Nothing good comes fast unless something ugly is chasing it." Michael did not interrupt. She stood and crossed her arms tightly over herself, not defensive now, but holding herself together. "If they print our names, people will come looking. Neighbors will talk. The school will hear. My landlord will hear. Child services will hear twice as loud." "I know." Denise gave a short, humorless laugh. "Do you?" It was not a fair question, and both of them knew it. That was precisely why it hurt. Michael took it without answering, because the truth was, no, not fully. He knew pressure, exposure, public scrutiny. He did not know what it was to have those things arrive while worrying whether your electricity would stay on through the weekend. Susan's warning echoed in his mind. Helpful, yes. Visible, no. Too late. Annie rose quietly from the couch. "Did I do something wrong again?" Denise turned instantly. "No." Michael spoke at the same time. "No." Marcus looked between them, confused now. Why's everybody mad? No one was mad, Michael thought. They were afraid. But fear was harder to explain to a 4-year-old than anger. Annie moved closer to her brother and rested a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Nobody's mad, baby." Michael watched that small motion, and felt the same cold resolve settle deeper in him. The system had already put this family under a microscope. Now the world wanted to turn them into content. He took out his phone and called Claire back before anyone could stop him. "Get Susan Levin on speaker in 5 minutes," he said, and set up the chairman call for later, much later. Claire did not ask why. "Done." Denise stared at him. "What are you doing?" "Trying to stay ahead of this." Her eyes flashed. "That's what powerful people always say right before everything gets bigger." The accusation landed because it was true often enough to deserve saying. Michael nodded once. "Then let me say something else. I'm not leaving you to handle this alone." Denise looked away first. That, more than anything, told him how badly she wanted to believe him and how dangerous belief still felt. 5 minutes later, Susan answered on speaker from her car. Michael summarized the reporter call in 3 crisp sentences. Denise filled in the rest: her fears, the school, the neighbors, the case review already open. Susan listened, then said, "All right. First, no one speaks to the press. Not you, not the children, not a neighbor speaking on your behalf. Second, if Child Services contacts you again before our scheduled response, you refer them to me. Third, we need to decide whether this story gets denied, delayed, or redirected." "Redirected how?" Denise asked. Susan did not hesitate. "By making it harder for anyone to twist. Right now the narrative is fragments. A rich man, a poor family, a child, and mystery. Mystery is what makes people cruel." Michael leaned against the counter. "So what do you recommend?" There was a pause. "If the story breaks, we may need a controlled statement. Not sentimental, not performative, just factual." He helped a family. Legal counsel is assisting because an agency review began. The children deserve privacy. Denise closed her eyes. "I don't want my babies turned into some lesson people post under." "Neither do I," Susan said, "which is why we make them less interesting to predators." After the call ended, silence returned, but now it had edges. Strategy, consequence, cost. Marcus had started to droop again, exhaustion overtaking confusion. Denise took his plate, wiped his face with a damp dish towel, and carried him toward the bedroom. He protested weakly that his truck had to come too. Annie picked it up and tucked it under his arm like a promise. When the bedroom door closed, the apartment seemed suddenly much smaller. Only 3 of them remained awake now. Annie stood by the little tree, one hand resting on the tabletop, where paper stars were scattered among the fake pine needles. Michael noticed one star in particular cut unevenly from a cereal box and covered in silver crayon. It was bent at one corner, but carefully hung. "My mama made those when she felt better," Annie said, following his gaze. "I made the crooked ones." "They're not crooked," he said. She looked at him, unconvinced, but pleased anyway. Denise came back out slower than before, the weariness in her body no longer hidden. She sat at the table and pressed her fingers to her temples. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. It was the first unguarded sentence she had spoken all evening. Michael pulled out the chair across from her and sat down at last. "Then we do the next part, one step at a time." Denise let out a tired breath. "You really believe one step at a time can beat a whole machine?" "No," he said. That made her look up. "I believe machines count on people being too tired to fight them properly." The words hung between them. Annie climbed into the chair beside her mother and curled one leg underneath herself, teddy bear still in her lap. "Mr. Michael?" He turned to her. "Are they going to take us away from Mama?" There it was. The center of it. Not legal process, not reputation, not public narrative, just the child-sized version of catastrophe. Michael held her gaze carefully. "I won't lie to you," he said. "There are people asking questions because they think questions make children safer. Sometimes they help, sometimes they don't. But right now, nobody is taking anyone tonight." Annie absorbed that. Not comforted. Exactly. But steadied. "Tonight," she repeated. "Yes." Then, after a beat, he added, "And tomorrow, there will be more people standing with your mother than there were yesterday." Annie looked at Denise, then back to him. "You promise?" Denise flinched a little at the word. Promise was expensive in that room. Michael did not answer lightly. "Yes," he said. This time, the promise was not born from instinct. It was chosen. Annie nodded and rested her head against her mother's arm. Denise covered the child's hand with her own and stared at the little tree by the window until her voice finally came out soft and frayed. All she wanted, Denise said, was a truck for her brother. That's all this started as. Michael looked toward the closed bedroom door where Marcus slept with his birthday gift in his arms. Yes, he said. And that's exactly why I'm not letting them turn it into anything else. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the old window pane. The tree lights blinked red, then gold, then green. Somewhere down the street, a siren wailed and faded. Chicago kept moving, indifferent as ever, but inside apartment 2B, something had changed. Not the poverty, not the illness, not the danger. Those were still there, as real as the unpaid years behind them and the uncertain days ahead. What had changed was smaller and stronger than any of that. A line had been drawn. On one side stood a tired mother, 2 children, and all the quiet humiliations that poor families were expected to survive without witness. On the other stood the people and systems that would reduce them to a case, a headline, a question, an example. And Michael knew, with a certainty that felt nothing like business and everything like obligation, which side he was on. Near midnight, he finally rose to leave. Denise walked him to the door again. The hallway light caught the strain in her face, but also something new, something almost like steadiness. I still don't know why you're doing this, she said. Michael thought of the locked toy box, of Annie saving half a sandwich, of Marcus laughing over a blue truck, of Denise trying to apologize for needing help at all. Then he answered with the only truth that mattered. Because someone should have seen you sooner. Denise's eyes filled, though she did not let the tears fall. She only nodded once. When he looked back from the landing, Annie was still visible in the doorway behind her mother. Small and solemn in the dim apartment light, Michael's scarf around her shoulders, the teddy bear tucked beneath her arm. For the first time since he had met her, she did not look like a child waiting for the world to decide whether she mattered. She looked like a child who had heard, perhaps only faintly, the first sound of someone refusing to let the world look away. Michael descended the stairs into the cold, knowing this was not an ending. It was the moment before the fight truly began. The story reminds us that kindness is not measured by wealth, but by the courage to truly see another human being. Annie did not ask for luxury or pity, she only wanted to bring joy to her little brother. Even while carrying burdens no child should have to bear. Through her, the audience is reminded that many struggling families are not broken because they lack love, but because they are left alone by systems that should protect them. Michael's actions show that real compassion means more than feeling sorry for someone. It means stepping forward, staying present, and choosing responsibility when it would be easier to walk away. Above all, the story teaches that quiet acts of love, dignity, and protection can challenge injustice more powerfully than power or money ever could. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.